Hey guys, I'm back again. What I wanted to touch on, which was brought up by some customers here local, and some stuff that I've seen in the past with, I had one customer bring in a gun that I had to clean up because he said his rounds was getting stuck in the chamber, wouldn't extract and eject. And basically I cleaned it up. He came, got it. A couple days later, called me back, says it was doing it again. Had to clean up burrs from him trying to dig the stuck round out, or stuck empty out. And then finally, I asked him, was he reloading? He said, yeah. And so anyway, we had some issues with him not sizing his brass properly. And I've had a lot of questions about stuff like that. And I tried to look around on YouTube and didn't really see much of this discussed, so I figured I'd do a video on it, and from a safety aspect too, because I had one guy who had a 308 like tactical or bench rest long range gun, and he yanked the barrel off and just throwed another 308 barrel on it and put some shims between the barrel and the receiver, trying to get the sights to clock. And I basically asked him, did he check headspace? He didn't know what that was or what a headspace gauge was. So that's what's prompting the video. So this is going to be, it's going to be for gunsmithing, but as well for reloading, because there's a lot of issues I get with reloading that I don't think a lot of people understand headspace as well as they should. And so basically what we're going to discuss first is the different types of cartridges and how they headspace. First, you got here, which will be a rimmed cartridge. This could be bottlenecked, it could be straight wall, 30-30 or 45-70, 7.62 by 54R, whatever. And basically it headspaces on the thickness of the rim. But if it's bottlenecked, the shoulder still needs to be in the right spot. Then you got a semi-rimmed, which is kind of looks like your typical round, like in handgun it could be a 38 Super, which looks close to a 9mm, but if you'll feel down it, you'll see that the rim sticks out a little bit further than the side of the brass or the base of the case. That's a semi-rimmed. Then you got rimless, which would be a 9mm or something like that, or 30-06, 308, which means that the rim is smaller in diameter than the base of the case. Then you have belted, which would be a belted magnum, and basically, okay, this one is going to headspace off the back of the case to case mouth if it's a straight wall case, or a datum point about middle ways of the shoulder if it's a bottleneck. That's the same way your rimless is going to headspace too. It's going to headspace from the back of the case to a datum line on the shoulder. And I'm trying to make this fast because I know I talk a lot in these videos and they end up getting long. On the belted magnum, it's going to headspace from the back of the case to the front of the belt. But again, on this one, it's going to be bottlenecked. You want to make sure that this is in the right spot, which your rimmer should take care of that, but they can be off and cause some issues there, which we'll probably get into. And this is going to be a rebated, which will measure from there to the end of the case if it's a straight wall case, or to a datum line if it's a bottleneck case. Okay, that's just to explain what cartridges, what type of cartridges, and how they where they headspace from. Okay, now what we're going to say, what I'm going to try to do is explain to you in simple terms of what headspace is. So you have a bolt face here and a cartridge here. whatever it is. Headspace is the gap between a loaded cartridge pushed all the way forward as far as it'll go and a bolt face pushed all the way back as far as it'll go. Most guns are going to have some headspace. So that's what headspace is. It's just the gap between the two. Alright. What issues become from headspace is if you have something under 40,000 PSI, they still can blow up, cause some safety issues, but typically they won't. There's circumstances where they will, don't get me wrong, but anything 45,000 and up are your high pressure stuff. You know, rifles, stuff like that, like 30-06, 308, Win Mags, stuff like that. These are the ones you got to concern yourself with as far as safety for the most part. And I got a glare on there. So the reason these end up, what you're going to get with these most of the time if you have headspace is you're going to get probably functioning problems. You know, you got too much headspace and you fire it and then you have misfires and, you know, failures to ignite the primer and stuff like that because the case can move forward that whatever the headspace is, which will basically detract from the forces given to the case by the firing pin, striker, whatever it is. Like I said, this is still enough pressure to cause issues and bad accidents, but typically it don't. And again, this is just for understanding. You should always go check the data for yourself and all that kind of stuff for a disclaimer. But what you have with, we're going to discuss pretty much this for the most part. Okay, as it relates to safety and reloading. When I say safety and reloading, I guess it goes in the same. You're going to have a case okay, so if you can get that, let me back this out a little bit. Okay, you're going to have a case here. It's like so. When you got 45,000 PSI and up, what you end up with is whatever headspace you got back here. This thing, this red is going to be the chamber of your rifle. Okay. When this thing ignites, this brass is going to blow out. It's all the way along this chamber. It's going to cling itself to the chamber. And the problem you have if you have excessive headspace is the base of this case, it's going back with all that pressure. It's going back to the bolt face stops it. This is why you see flattened primers, tooling marks that's in the bolt face that will show up on your brass, stuff like that, because that much pressure and force going back, it's going to push that brass back. And the only thing that's going to stop it is your bolt face. So if you're reloading and you're concerned about brass life, all right, typically 12 thousandths is the amount of stretch you'll get out of brass before it fails or separates. This can go up or down a little bit, but we're just talking rule of thumb here. It's about 12 thousandths. If you have a rifle with 4 or 5 thousandths headspace, we'll call it 4, just for math. Okay, you fire this brand new round or brand new brass one time, and it has stretched probably 3.5, but we're gonna call it 4. It has stretched 4 thousandths the first time you fire it. Now, if you're one of these guys who full length size your brass all the time, and you size it all the way back to SAMI spec, then you fire it again. You know, you fired it once, it stretched 4 thousandths, which is probably going to be around here somewhere that it stretched. You resize it back, bump this shoulder back that whole 4 thousandths because you're going back to SAMI spec. Then you fire the second shot. Okay, this is the first. Second time you fire it, you now have 8 thousandths of stretch. Okay? Third time, you now have 12 thousandths stretch. So now this may or may not separate or, you know, crack or whatever on the third firing that you've done. And if not, okay, if it don't, let's say on the fourth firing, on the fourth firing, you're gonna have 16 thousandths stretch. Okay, that's probably going to separate or crack or cause you issues, but it may go beyond that. I mean, cases and manufacturers and stuff it's all going to be a little bit different. But so what I'm getting at here is you need to determine. I see people on YouTube telling folks how to set up dies, and they're not wrong, but they're not right. If you're setting up a die for a specific gun, and you're trying to, you know, get brass life and all that stuff, the way they're telling you to set it up is not exactly right. If you don't care about brass life, you're just going to reload it, shoot it a couple times, throw it away, then none of this really matters. Only matters if you got excessive headspace in your rifle. Because then if you got excessive headspace, let's say you got 15 thousandths of headspace, you fire it once, you've already stretched it to the point where it may fracture then, but let's say it don't and you resize it again, you're probably going to get a separation on the first refire that you do, because that's going to go to 30 thousandths, which most brass probably shouldn't stretch that far. So next, what you want to do here, instead of getting 3 to 4 firings out of your high dollar Lapua brass, is you want to first off set the die up, the full length sizer die up, where you know these guys will tell you to run it down till it touches the round and then tighten it down. Some guys will say run it down till it touches the round, back it off a quarter of a turn. Some guys will tell you turn it till it touches the round and then turn it in another eighth, quarter, half to a full turn, whatever the case is. So all of them are right, but all of them are wrong, depending on your situation. So what I suggest you do for brass life and for safety too, is that you take your brand new cartridge, you measure your headspace with like the Hornady headspace measuring tools, and that should be in the neighborhood of SAMI spec plus or minus a couple thousandths. Then once you fire it the first time, you take that measurement again, and whatever the difference between once or new and once fired, the difference between the two is going to be roughly your headspace of that particular gun. So you want to know what that is, and that way you can neck size, or if you want a full length size, you can still full length size, but only bump it back a thousandths, maybe 2, shorter than the fired length. Now some people will, you know, argue that, you know, it takes 2 firings to get it to full length, whatever. this is just for information. I mean, this is just for you to understand the situation. Your particular situation may be a little bit different, so that none of this is definite. It's just to give you a better understanding of headspace and how that relates to reloading and safety. Okay. So what I would do is neck size, because you'll probably get 2 or 3 firings, and then it'll get kind of tough to close the bolt, and you'll want to go back and bump the shoulders back. And so I would fire it, neck size it, fire it, neck size it, fire it, then bump the shoulder back 1/1000, fire it, neck size it, fire it, neck size it, fire it, bump the shoulder back. So instead of getting probably 3 firings, you're going to get 3 just with neck sizing alone, probably. And then when you bump it back, you're going to stretch the case 1 more thousandths or 2, whatever you're bumping it back to, and you're going to get 3 more firings from that, so on and so forth. Okay, so just so you understand what I'm getting at, and the reason you see brass stretching and separating and cracking and stuff like that is because, like I said, this is going to cling to this chamber. This is why you have a cam, like on a bolt gun, you have a cam angle on your action where your bolt handle in most cases meets your action. You have at the very top of the lift, when you rack it open, you have a cam angle that breaks the brass loose from the chamber. This is why that's there, because this brass will flare out with all that pressure. That bolt face, that back of that case is going back till it gets stopped by something. So if there was nothing there, every time you fire even brand new brass, it would blow the back of the case off. Okay, so what you end up with is a crack or separation about here, because the chamber is clinging on, or the brass is clinging on to the chamber all the way back to about here, and then about here across is real thick. So in between, it's all about surface area, so in between here and here is where most of your stretch is going to come from. And then of course you get the cracks in the neck. That's due mostly to hardening of the brass, where you're not, you're working the brass too much, and the more you work the brass, the more you're going to harden the brass. It's like aluminum, it's work hardenable. So if you're annealing like you should, then you'll get longer case life before this happens. If you're bumping back a minimum, you're going to get longer case life before any of this happens, or even a gun exploding in your face. Let's see, make sure I'm not missing that. I'm trying to make this informative enough, but not overly informative where I talk for an hour, and you have to watch a boring ass video. So what is the difference between go and no-go in most cases is 0 to about 7 thousandths. And that can vary from cartridge and manufacturer of headspace gauges and stuff like that. I haven't looked it up in a SAMI book to know exactly what it is, but that's roughly from headspace gauges. That's what you're looking at. Now on handgun stuff, it typically goes about 0 to 10 to maybe 12 thousandths. Difference between go and no go. And just to verify that, I've got some 308 headspace gauges. Let me get you down here. Okay, I got some 308 headspace gauges, a 308, make sure this is 308, yeah, 308 Dillon case gauge. I got 40 cal headspace gauges, 40 cal headspace, case gauge, and we're going to measure the difference between the two. Alright, so make sure our calipers 0 and repeat. We're going to start with the handgun stuff because it's easier to measure. We may not even measure the rifle. Okay. So right here we have 40 cal, and this is climber. This is the go. Remember what I said, that your most of your handgun stuff, straight wall case stuff, is going to measure from the base of the case to the end of the brass, the case mouth. So we're going to measure this go, and we come up with, if you can see that, we come up with 851.5 thousandths, and then the no-go 863 thousandths. So that's roughly 12 thousandths, if I did my math right, between go and no-go. And again, on your pistol stuff, it's not that critical. Your headspace ain't. It's going to cause you more of a issue with the gun functioning than it's going to cause safety. If you have unsupported chambers and you got a lot of headspace and stuff, then you got issues. Okay. Oh yeah, forgot to show you what it means in your case gauge. All right. This is a go, which means it should set below flush or flush. So if you can see that, it's almost perfectly flush. I can't tell where there's any difference. Now the no-go should set above flush, as you can see here. See how that's setting above flush? So now, let's just say your case is set below flush. That means you got headspace in that case. If they set flush, then you're pretty much dead on, and anything above flush is too long for your chamber. Let me put these up, and we'll look at the same thing on the 308. Got a go and a no-go, and we got a case gauge with a groove cut in it. Now these case gauges aren't necessarily precise. They're just a tool to get you in the ballpark, so you know that if your rounds fit this, it should fit your rifle or your pistol. Okay, this sets in the middle. Okay, so using this as a headspace gauge, if it's flush, that means you got no headspace. If it sets below flush to where this other notch is, then as long as it's in between the two groove, the top of the gauge and the groove, you're good. If it's below the groove, then your brass is too short. This no-go should set above flush, and it does. Now let's measure, see if we can get a semi-measurement of how much above it sets. I'm using the wrong one. Okay, this one should set below flush. It's 3,000. So obviously these case gauges aren't precise like the headspace gauges would be, but they'll get you in the ballpark as far as reloading goes. But again, it goes back to what we talked about here as far as brass life and issues like that, because like I said, 12 thousandths roughly is what you can expect your brass to stretch before it comes apart. Now let me go over here, and I'm going to get a Hornady headspace gauge. We're going to measure, and that's not precise either, but we're going to measure the length difference between these two, and it should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 to 8 thousandths. Alright, so we got the headspace gauge here. We'll put it on. And we're going to zero it out. We're going to see what the go gauge measures. It measures, let me write this down, 1 inch, 623 thousandths. This is the go. And this is the no-go. That's 1 inch, 627.5. We'll call it 28 thousandths. Okay, so these are actually closer than a lot of gauges, but usually that's like 5.5 thousandths. Usually it's around 7 thousandths difference between go and no go. Now, if you have a rifle or a gun that closes on a no go, that don't necessarily mean it's unsafe. It just have the potential to be. And on the low pressure stuff, the reason you don't see this a whole lot on the low pressure stuff is because at 40 and below, that can vary a little bit, of course. But at 40 and below, like handgun cartridges, 30-30, stuff like that, low pressure stuff, or at least the handgun pressures that are low, they're not going to cling to the chamber wall like this is going to. So if you have some headspace and you fire it, that whole cartridge can shift back till it hits the bolt instead of stretching your brass. And so that's why you end up with seeing more of this kind of stuff happening on high pressure stuff than you do on low pressure stuff. So it's always good to understand headspace and know what you're doing when it comes to reloading and when you're working on guns, because you don't want to go, for example, a guy brings you in a rifle and it ain't shooting too good, he wants you to lap the bolt, and you don't have machines to cut it, so you're just going to hand lap it. And if you lap too far, or you didn't check the headspace to begin with, you don't want to go changing stuff like that, relationships of parts, and extending the headspace, especially on a rifle like that. So that's kind of where all this is coming from. And if you have any questions, just leave me some comments. I'll try to get to them. I've got a couple videos where I go through and show you how to set up a die for a specific gun, and I got another one where I show you how to determine the headspace in your gun using new brass and once fired. So I hadn't posted them because I just didn't really want to get too much into the reloading stuff, but I may do that later. Or if you guys want to see it, let me know. And if I haven't lost them in my computer, then I'll post them up for you guys. But hopefully this helps you guys out and understand a little more. And I may have left some stuff out because I'm trying to rush through it so my videos aren't so long and drawn out. And if you're okay with the long drawn out discussion videos, let me know that in the comments also, so I can quit trying to rush through stuff. But hope this helps some of you guys out. I'll catch you on the next video.